Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where our mission is to cut through the noise, synthesize the data, and deliver the high-impact, actionable knowledge you need, specifically tailored for you, the learner. Today, we are tackling a learning challenge that, well, it frustrates nearly every independent student of English: fluency.
It's such a core problem, isn't it? If you ask, pretty much any language expert for the #1 tip on how to improve conversational English, the answer is always the same. It's relentless, really. Talk to native speakers. It's just this constant standard refrain.
And for so many people listening, that advice is just completely unrealistic. It can almost feel a bit patronizing, actually.
It really can.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Why does that advice fail so many people? It's not just one thing. For some, it's purely a financial constraint. Paying for regular, high-quality conversation practice, often multiple times a week, that's just not sustainable for a long-term study plan.
Precisely. The cost adds up so quickly. And for others, it's more of a psychological hurdle. It's a confidence gap. They want to practice on their own first, to get a basic level of polish before they feel exposed or maybe embarrassed in front of a teacher or a native speaker.
And they just can't find anyone. Maybe they don't have local access or the time zone flexibility for online practice. There's so many roadblocks.
So many.
So our mission for this deep dive is explicit. We're going to bypass that impossible generic advice. We've taken the source material, which is an 8-step action plan, and we've broken it down into these high-value practical techniques. This whole plan is designed for you, the independent learner, to dramatically improve your spoken English purely at home.
Exactly. We're moving from the often abstract theory of language acquisition to, well, the nuts and bolts of practical daily application. The sources give us this rich, detailed roadmap for turning the passive knowledge you already have, all that vocabulary you recognize when you're reading, into fluent, confident, and actually usable speech.
We're here to extract the core mechanisms that make that independent progress not just possible, but highly effective. Let's start with a foundational adjustment, tip number 1, and this demands a major pivot for anyone who's transitioned from focusing on reading English to actually speaking it. The instruction is incredibly clear. You must learn full phrases, not just individual vocabulary words.
And what's fascinating about this advice is that the source creator immediately acknowledges that this method isn't universal. They actually noted that studying individual, isolated vocabulary worked perfectly well for them with languages like Spanish. But for spoken English, particularly when you're aiming for that fluency and naturalness, the cognitive focus has to shift entirely to entire phrases, those chunks of language that just naturally belong together.
Right. And this isn't just about memorizing idioms, though that helps. It's about capturing the music of the language, the sound. Let's take the example from the source material. If we look at a single word, let's use amazed on its own, especially on a flashcard, it's almost always flat. Amazed. It has its dictionary definition, sure, but it has no emotional or acoustic context.
And that flat delivery is exactly what often marks non-native speech, even when the grammar is perfect. But the moment you embed that word in a sentence, the entire acoustic profile changes. I was amazed. Now, suddenly that word has inflection, it has specific emphasis, the stress might fall on was or on mazed, and the tone carries the meaning. You're not just learning the definition anymore, you're learning how a native speaker delivers the feeling of being amazed, the surprise, the intensity.
That concept, prosody, the rhythm and intonation, it's absolutely vital for sounding natural.
It is.
But that distinction is often lost on new learners who just hear sound natural, isn't it? What's the specific error they're making when they ignore that inflection?
The primary error is monotone delivery. They just apply a steady, even volume and pitch across the whole sentence. When your brain hasn't learned the musical pattern of the phrase, it just defaults to this flat rhythm. So the practical mechanism here, the actionable advice for you, is all about intense, active listening. When you're listening to English TV, YouTube, radio, whatever, you should be actively picking up on those full phrases.
And the crucial next step is to imitate them.
Imitation is everything, but it's how you imitate. The key is to pause and repeat, but focus not just on the words, but on where the speaker is pushing the pitch up or saying something slightly more loudly.
So you're almost mapping the sound.
You are. Learners should try to use physical methods to capture this. When you write down the new phrase, maybe use capital letters for the stress, I was amazed, or use a little upward arrow to mark a rising inflection. This imitation technique, specifically training your mouth and your ear to reproduce that sound profile, is what transitions you from a learner who reads English well to a speaker who sounds really natural. It's muscle memory for the rhythm of the language.
And this approach Also solves that vocabulary isolation problem. So if you do happen to pick up an individual word because sometimes a great new word just jumps out at you, the source says you have to immediately find an example of it used in a full sentence.
That's the rule of thumb. You have to connect that isolated word to its tone and context immediately. Every new word must come with its habitat, the sentence where it lives. This contextual reinforcement provides not only the meaning, but the grammatical function and the emotional weight the word carries when it's actually spoken.
So you're not building a static glossary of single terms.
Exactly. You're building a dynamic library of usable, flowing sound bites. And that is a much, much more efficient use of your time than just rote memorization.
Okay, now let's pivot to tip number 3, which tackles the infamous grammar problem. We all know grammar is necessary, but the source makes a very strong, almost liberating statement here. The focus should be targeting grammar gaps, not falling into textbook overload.
This is a massive course correction for so many people, especially those who come from more traditional language education systems. The source is absolutely clear. Grammar is not the most important part of language learning, and it is definitely not the be-all and end-all. The explicit note about the lack of value in trying to go through a massive grammar book cover to cover, that should be a huge relief. That approach is just overwhelming, it's paralyzing, and it's highly inefficient for building speaking confidence.
It reminds me of that classic but, well, deeply flawed piece of advice. Just learn English like a baby. It sounds so charming and organic, but the source explains precisely why that analogy just fails for an adult learner.
It fails because it ignores one massive factor: total immersion. The source reminds us that a baby is immersed in their mother tongue the entire time. They have this overwhelming, constant opportunity 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to pick up grammar and vocabulary unconsciously. They're living, breathing, and sleeping in that language. And even with that 100% immersion,
It still takes them years to speak fluently.
multiple years, exactly. So an adult learner who's juggling work and life and family cannot possibly replicate that level of immersion. Relying purely on passive acquisition is, well, it's a recipe for very slow progress and a lot of frustration.
So we need the adult learner to use their cognitive advantages, their ability to analyze and target specific problems.
Exactly. We shift from that exhaustive linear study model to what the source calls the gap-filling strategy. The goal is no longer to master every single obscure tense or conjugation before you dare to speak. The goal is to constantly be on the lookout for specific holes or gaps in your current operational grammar knowledge. You use what you know, and when a phrase doesn't sound right or when you feel confused about a specific structure, that specific doubt becomes your immediate target for research.
Can you give us a concrete example? What might a common gap look like for, say, an intermediate speaker?
Oh, a huge one for many learners is the correct use of prepositions on, in, at, for. They often follow these subtle, non-translatable rules. Another massive gap is the English article system, knowing when to use the versus a versus no article at all. So instead of studying a whole chapter on articles, the learner might encounter a phrase like, I went to school, and wonder, wait, why isn't it the school? That small moment of doubt becomes their specific research topic for the day. It's necessity-driven, personalized learning.
That sounds almost investigative. Instead of starting with chapter 1 of a 600-page book, I'm starting with a direct, practical problem I ran into 10 minutes ago.
And this is where the internet becomes your most powerful home learning partner. You research that specific dot. While you might want to save some questions for a conversation partner or a teacher, the source strongly suggests using specialized online language forums. It highlights the genuinely high quality and, the enthusiasm of teachers on these platforms who often dedicate their time to answering highly specific questions for free.
So you're crowdsourcing targeted grammatical clarification. You're turning a general confusion into a precise rule you can immediately apply.
Yes. It reframes grammar study from this miserable chore into a dynamic, investigative puzzle that you, the learner, are in complete control of.
That concept of identifying and researching a specific problem leads us perfectly into tip number 4, which is all about the psychology of learning and memory. It's an essential rule. Don't let anything go. The importance of immediate capture.
This tip speaks to a moment of just universal frustration. You're listening to a podcast or watching a film, you hear an unfamiliar word or a confusing grammatical structure, and that little voice in your head says,
I can't be bothered to stop and write that down right now. I'll remember it later. It sounds important.
and the source gives us a stern but very accurate warning. 9 times out of 10, that insight, that vocabulary word, that specific grammatical doubt will just vanish. This isn't just common sense, it's cognitive psychology at work. Your brain is great at immediate short-term processing, but it's terrible at unstructured, uncaptured recall of new, isolated bits of data.
The source uses this wonderfully relatable analogy of the memory trap. It's like when you come up with a fantastic tune or a brilliant idea in your head, you assure yourself you'll remember it tomorrow. It's too good to forget. How could I possibly lose this amazing melody?
And yet the next morning, it's gone. Completely lost. The structure, the nuance, the key, it's just gone forever. The same mechanism applies directly to language doubts. If
Yeah.
you don't capture that moment of learning or confusion in the moment, that opportunity is lost. You might have to relearn the exact same concept weeks or months later. This isn't about being perfectly vigilant all the time. It's about establishing a non-negotiable habit of immediate action when a high-value insight strikes.
So what's the immediate action plan? The source details two essential, very accessible tools.
First, the classic low-tech method. Just write it down immediately. A small notebook, a sticky note, a dedicated note on your phone. Just get the text or the concept down, maybe marking where you heard it, like podcast, 14 minutes in.
And the second tool is highly modern, and it removes that spelling barrier, using the voice notes function on your phone.
Absolutely vital. This is crucial if you don't know how the word is spelled, or if the doubt is auditory like a specific pronunciation issue or the placement of stress we talk about in tip 1. You capture the sound of the doubt. For instance, if you heard a speaker use a contraction you hadn't heard before, you don't need to spell it. You just press record and say, what is shouldn't of, and you capture the audio and the confusion right there.
That's brilliant because it removes the friction of needing to know how to spell a complex word while you're trying to listen. It minimizes the time you need to stop your active consumption.
And what's more, this capture mechanism serves a really profound logistical purpose for you as an independent learner. For those who can't afford or access a teacher every single week, you now have this highly organized chronological backlog of specific high-value questions. The suggestion is to save up all these recorded or written doubts and then book one focused hour per month with an English speaker or a teacher.
So you've essentially turned sporadic, potentially unfocused chats into a single high-impact consulting session. Instead of stumbling through small talk, you spend that hour systematically clearing up as many of those specific holes and gaps as you possibly can.
It's maximizing expert time and minimizing financial investment. You arrive prepared with hyper-specific questions like, why do we use the present perfect continuous in this context, rather than just vague requests like, tell me about English grammar. Whoa. This structure for the independent learner is often the missing piece that prevents them from moving to the next level.
But how do we stop this gap-filling strategy, plus the immediate capture requirement, from becoming, well, paralyzing? If I feel like I have to stop and record every single time I hear a doubt, I'll never finish watching a 30-minute video.
That is a critical concern, and the source addresses it by providing a necessary mental note on stress. You have to balance this vigilance with avoiding excessive stress. The learner must take everything with a pinch of salt and make the process work for them. Don't let the capturing process become another source of anxiety. If the flow is broken, you need to recalibrate your approach. Maybe you only capture major recurring doubts, or you designate a specific 15-minute period each day for focused consumption where stopping is allowed.
The ultimate goal is fluency and confidence, not mental exhaustion. The core idea is to establish the discipline that when a high-value doubt occurs, the ones you suspect are genuinely limiting your speech, you capture it, ensuring that learning insight is never lost. Okay, moving now from capturing input knowledge to actively deploying and refining your output. Let's jump into tip number 5. This is about active preparation. Prepare and perfect anecdotes and personal stories.
This is a wonderfully strategic piece of advice, and it's deeply related to the emotional arc of language learning. The source mentions the high anxiety that conversational topics initially caused when they were learning Spanish, but once certain stories and narratives were mastered, that anxiety transformed into a source of joy and excitement.
And that emotional payoff is what drives learners forward. I love that insight from the source. I really think there is no better feeling than making someone laugh in the language that you're learning. That sense of connection, of truly conveying your personality and humor through a foreign language, is maybe the ultimate reward for all that hard work.
But the source immediately grounds this in conversational reality. Very few people can spontaneously launch into a perfect, engaging story. Even in your native language, the best storytellers often prepare and rehearse their key narratives. If the source speaker, a native English expert, finds it necessary to prepare stories in advance, it is absolutely essential for a learner operating under the constraint of a second language.
But isn't rehearsing stories the exact opposite of natural conversation? Doesn't that risk sounding like a robot reading it out, even if the grammar is polished?
It's a calculated risk, and the source even calls it a form of cheating, but then justifies it by saying it works. The goal isn't spontaneity in the moment, but rather strategic preparation. The purpose is to have 5 or 6 polished, entertaining stories up your sleeve, ready to deploy when you meet someone new or when there's that inevitable lull in the conversation.
You're preloading conversational ammunition to guarantee a positive outcome.
Exactly.
Let's look closely at the 4-step practice cycle the source lays out, because this is where the depth of the preparation lies.
Okay, step 1. Write the stories down in English. This is the foundation. Get the core narrative onto paper. Focus on the flow and the logic of the story. Don't worry about perfection yet, just the structure.
Step 2. Correct the grammar and flow. This is critical. Ideally, you bring the written text to a native speaker or a trusted teacher, maybe during that monthly high-impact hour, to polish it up. You want the foundation, the grammar, the choice of verb tense to be absolutely solid before you commit it to memory.
Then step 3. Practice reading it aloud multiple times. This is where you connect the concepts from tip 1. You're internalizing the full phrases, the correct stress, the tone. You're building muscle memory for high-quality delivery.
And finally, step 4, which is the most critical step for avoiding that robot effect. Practice telling it with no prompts. You have to practice telling the story repeatedly without looking at the script. The goal is polished delivery that sounds natural, even though it was rehearsed, allowing the phrases to just roll off the tongue.
And the emphasis should be on stories you'll probably have to repeat often anyway, which makes the practice highly efficient. The source suggests narratives like funny mistakes you've made while speaking English, how you got your current job, descriptions of your school days, or the story of how you met your partner. These foundational biographical narratives are conversational gold because they are just universally relevant.
And speaking of conversational gold, the source includes a fascinating cultural note on UK humor, which is key for anyone interacting with British speakers. It mentions the UK's love for self-deprecating humor and irony.
This is so crucial for successful conversational deployment, especially if your prepared stories involve any kind of mishap or mistake. Self-deprecating humor is the ability to mock yourself, to laugh at your own errors or imperfections. It's a mechanism for signaling that you don't take yourself too seriously. The source notes that sharing funny mistakes shows you're a chilled and funny person.
And irony. Can you quickly clarify that? It can be really difficult for a non-native speaker to grasp the difference between saying something and meaning the opposite.
Right. In UK English, irony often shows up as mild understatement or saying something terrible is lovely. For instance, if the weather is absolutely miserable and it's pouring rain, a British speaker might look outside and say, well, isn't that a glorious day? The listener is expected to understand, through context and tone, that the speaker means the exact opposite. Successfully deploying this requires advanced tonal control, which links right back to the prosody we discussed earlier.
The source even mentions creating a specialized video on British humor, recognizing how complex that cultural nuance is.
Exactly. So this preparation isn't a shortcut to cheating, it's a strategic shortcut to conversational confidence. You're guaranteeing that when the opportunity to speak arises, you deploy your best, most polished, and culturally aware material.
Okay, let's transition from that active output preparation to a more strategic passive immersion with tip number 6, eavesdropping via chatty podcasts.
The source highlights this global podcast revolution, and especially the prevalence in the UK of podcasts featuring, non-famous people just chatting with their friends. It's often just casual, unrehearsed dialogue.
And this genre fills a profound conversational void for the independent learner. The unique value proposition is that it lets you eavesdrop and listen in on natural, spontaneous conversation patterns that often happen way too quickly to follow in real life.
It perfectly simulates being in a fast-paced English-speaking group without any of the pressure to participate.
It's the substitute for the constant environmental immersion a baby gets. While it's not 24/7, it is high-quality, authentic language use. And the learner has a massive advantage over live conversation. Flexibility.
Oh, the flexibility is non-negotiable for independent study. Podcasts can be paused, started, slowed down to 75% speed, and replayed endlessly. You can cycle through the same 60 seconds until you internalize a particular idiomatic phrase or structure.
And that flexibility is multiplied exponentially when we talk about the heroes of language learning, the people who provide transcripts.
Transcripts are a game changer. They transform passive listening into an active reading and analysis exercise. If you hear a phrase you don't understand, you pause, look at the transcript, link the sound to the text, and capture the doubt using the system from Tick 4. You should actively trace the text with your eyes while listening, noticing how native speakers don't pronounce every single word distinctly. They connect words, they swallow syllables, and the transcript helps link that messy reality back to the clean written form.
So what are the specific recommendations from the source? We need some examples of this chatty genre to get people started.
The source highlights two great options. For football fans, the Peter Crouch podcast is mentioned as being absolutely fantastic because it's a group of people chatting naturally and it offers a wide variety of regional accents, which is great exposure. And for general comedy and general knowledge, No Such Thing as a Fish is recommended.
Both are great examples of spontaneous banter, not scripted interviews. The source also suggests checking the UK podcast charts to get a sense of what's good and what's not.
Yeah, and it emphasizes that there are many more options out there, including some with rude names, which signals that authentic language often comes in less sanitized packages. The key is that these are not formal lessons. They are entertainment that acts as a curriculum, bridging the gap between your structured lessons and the messy reality of genuine conversation.
Let's shift our focus now to conversational content and social strategy with tip number 7. Always have good, positive topics.
This is a fantastic piece of social engineering disguised as a learning tip. The source acknowledges that conversation often revolves around current affairs, but the truth is, so much modern news is just relentlessly depressing. People generally don't want to talk about how terrible things have been. It just drains the energy from any interaction before it even gets going.
The source shares a personal, very candid anecdote about feeling down and reaching a point of despair because the constant news cycle made the world seem like an awful place. The solution, which drastically improved their outlook and their conversational ammunition, was an introduction to positive news sources.
This is introduced as an amazing tool. Newspapers have always been a teacher's favorite for inciting dialogue, but if the content is constantly negative or politically charged, it just dampens the conversational mood and can create awkward tension. Positive news, on the other hand, creates immediate, uplifting dialogue.
What specific positive news resources are recommended for the listener?
There are two specific subscriptions detailed, and the source recommends subscribing to both because they're written differently and minimize overlap. The first is The Happy Newspaper, which is written by Emily Coxhead. The second is Positive News. Both are released quarterly, which gives you plenty of time to process the content, and both are available as physical copies or via their websites with worldwide delivery.
So the benefit isn't just a fantastic mood boost for you, the learner, but a tangible conversational prompt that is guaranteed to elicit a positive response. You read a great story, and now you have something interesting and positive to share, bypassing the usual negativity of small talk.
And this leads directly into a really ingenious application idea, the Conversation Club. The source encourages you to extrapolate the use of these resources into a group activity. If you're struggling to find a speaking club, a very common complaint, you should just create one yourself.
A Happy News Speaking Club, maybe meeting quarterly on Zoom when the new editions arrive, using the newspaper content as a conversational prompt. That is such a low-stress, high-value framework because everyone is guaranteed to come in with positive content and a positive frame of mind.
It completely removes that awkward "what should we talk about" and replaces it with "let's discuss the most inspiring story from the latest Happy newspaper." This turns independent study into a communal application-based learning experience, offering that targeted speaking practice learners crave without the high cost of a formal class.
Finally, let's turn to tip number 8, which I believe is the most crucial confidence booster for any independent learner. Chill out and de-stress about accent.
This requires us to draw a sharp, clear distinction between two concepts that are constantly, and I mean constantly, conflated by learners. We have to differentiate between improving pronunciation and stressing over accent reduction.
Right. Improving pronunciation is essential. It's non-negotiable for effective communication. It means speaking clearly and understandably, making sure others can easily comprehend the distinct sound units you are using. This is a technical skill based on mechanics, articulation, and mastering things like phonemes.
And a phone is just the smallest unit of sound in language that can distinguish one word from another, like the P in pat versus the B in bat. Improving pronunciation means mastering these sound units and the acoustic rhythm so that your words are unambiguous, but stressing over getting rid of your accent is entirely different.
The source is unequivocal on this. An accent is a part of your identity. It carries your history, your culture, your unique background. Unless you, the learner, genuinely enjoy the process of mimicking accents, which is a hobby for some people, you should absolutely avoid it if it causes you stress or anxiety or makes you feel bad about yourself.
And we get the allure. The source mentions the speaker's own experience learning Spanish, living with a Spanish family, and that amazing feeling of being mistaken for a native speaker. That immediate validation that you passed as a native is a powerful psychological reward.
But the reality of professional and conversational success tells a far more nuanced story. And this is where the source provides a single powerful proof point that should instantly alleviate a learner's anxiety about their accent. The anecdote about visiting Google and YouTube offices.
This is the counter-argument to the myth that fluency requires a native-like sound. The speaker spent extensive time with employees at both Google and YouTube offices in different international locations. And what they observed was that a very high percentage, and they really emphasize very high percentage of the people working in these massive, successful, high-salary companies had very strong, very clearly non-native accents.
That detail is so critical because it forces a psychological shift. If these highly successful global professionals who operate daily at the highest levels of business and communication can achieve incredible career success without losing their native accent, then the accent itself is demonstrably not a barrier.
It's not. The accent has not affected their success. In fact, the source concludes that seeing this phenomenon is impressive. It shifts your perception from, oh, they haven't lost their accent, to, wow, they are bilingual and excellent at their job, communicating professionally every single day in their second language. It validates the notion that clarity trumps native mimicry every time.
So the message for you, the learner, is dedicate your energy to clear pronunciation, mastering those phones, and the prosody to make yourself easily understood, not on erasing a part of your identity that may bring you pride. If trying to reduce your accent brings you shame or stress, drop it immediately and redirect that energy into mastering the conversational strategies we've discussed. #outro.
We've covered a tremendous amount of ground today. We've successfully moved away from that unhelpful advice of just talk to natives and established a comprehensive structure for powerful, independent learning directly from this source material.
We have. We've learned that success in spoken English is achievable on your own by focusing on capturing and imitating full sound-based phrases, not single words. By using targeted, gap-filling grammar correction, by strategically preparing and polishing personal anecdotes using that 4-step cycle, and by using smart listening tools, specifically those chatty, authentic podcasts with transcripts.
And to wrap up, the source provides a quick reminder of some supplementary learning tools available online from the creator of this 8-step plan, all designed to support independent study. First, there is the speaker's vlogging channel, which focuses on life on a farm in the English countryside. It's specifically designed for learners because every single vlog is fully subtitled, which enhances both listening skills and focused vocabulary acquisition.
And for that targeted, independent pronunciation work addressing those specific clarity issues we just talked about, there is the website pronunciation tool. This allows you to click on different phones and hear them pronounced in isolation, giving you a kind of laboratory environment to address sound gaps without needing constant teacher feedback.
I think we should leave the listener with a final provocative thought, returning to that essential distinction in tip 8 between clarity and identity. The source noted genuine concern from learners about feeling they were compromising or losing a bit of their identity by trying to lose their accent.
It's a profound dilemma, isn't it? You need clear pronunciation to be effective and communicative, but culturally and personally, your accent is often viewed as a piece of who you are and where you come from.
So the question we pose to you, the learner, is this. If your personal, cultural, or national identity is tied up in your accent, how can you balance the essential, non-negotiable need for understandable pronunciation, that clarity that allows others to comprehend you easily, with preserving the unique cultural voice that makes you, you? What is your personal goal for pronunciation really designed to achieve?
Food for thought indeed. We hope this roadmap empowers you to approach fluency with renewed purpose and confidence, entirely on your own terms and from the comfort of your own home. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.